Welcome to Early Intervention Matters, the podcast that helps parents, teachers, and health professionals understand the diagnosis, treatment, care, and support of children with autism, ADHD, Tourette's, and other neurodevelopmental challenges. Your host, Dr. Inyang Takon, is a consultant neurodevelopment pediatrician, and she will provide insight through interviews, answering questions, and breaking down complicated topics. By sharing stories from parents and professionals in the field, we hope to make sense of what can be an overwhelming topic. Early intervention is crucial with children with developmental difficulties. Yes, early intervention matters. And now, here's your host, Dr. Inyang Takon.
Hello everyone, this is Early Intervention Matters podcast. It's a platform where we have conversations relating to children with neurodiversity, but we also look into other neurodevelopmental conditions or neurological conditions. I am Dr. Inyang Takon. I'm consultant neurodevelopmental pediatrician, also specializing in epilepsy, as you would see from our conversations today. And I'm the host of this podcast. So I'm really pleased today to have Mike Gomoll, who is going to introduce himself. But this conversation we'll be having today centers around Mike and the family's journey. In 2005, a 7-month-old boy had his first seizure. His name was Joe. What followed was years of misdiagnoses, relentless uncertainty, and eventually the kind of loss no parent should ever have to carry. But here's what I want you to know before we begin. This episode is not about grief. It's about what one father built from this journey. Mike turned the love for his son into a movement that has raised about $2 million, filled arenas with rock legends, and given hope to millions of families living with rare epilepsy. And this is Early Intervention Matters, and this is Joy's song. And we welcome Mike to the podcast. Thank you, Mike, for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to talk about my son, to be honest with you. It's a wonderful, besides all the other things that have gone on with this, it's not many folks that are given the opportunity after losing a child to still talk about that child 15 years later. So any chance I get to talk about Joe is a good day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Mike, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself before we talk about Joy?
Sure. So I'm retired. I live here in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm retired and I live with my wife and we have 2 children. My daughter Julia is getting her master's degree in kinesiology, so I'm always very proud to talk about her. And my son Sam is 24 and he just got his music degree, so he's got to figure out how he's going to make a living as a musician. But he's got encouraging parents that are letting him chase his dream as well. So I am retired. I worked at IBM for many years, and it actually took me to London several times. The IBM office is in South Bank in London, where you guys are. And I did that for a career, didn't have really anything to do with music. But so all 3 of our kids, Julia, Sam, and then Joe, were all adopted from Guatemala. So my wife and I decided to build our family through adoption. And about 4 or 5 months after he was home, Joe had his first seizure sitting on his grandpa's lap down in Chicago. And that started our journey. And it got me thinking, I was still working at the time, but when the time came, it should be a good opportunity for us to do something to help other people that are starting on this journey. And since his passing, now it's become even more of a mission to try to make sure that if we can stop other families from going through some of the same things we did, then it's worthwhile.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And just taking you back to the beginning after Joey had his first seizure, what did those early days look like for you and the family? How often was he having the seizures?
Yeah. So first, Epilepsy is the great unknown,
Mm.
especially if you've never dealt with it. But even for those of you like yourself in the profession, I found that the neurologists that I connected best with were the ones that were honest with me and said, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, because it doesn't do any good to kind of sugarcoat what you're up against, especially when it turns out to be a severe diagnosis like Joe's Dravet was. For us, at first, it wasn't a lot of concern because we were told, oh, kids have, febrile seizures. Most kids grow out of it. It's not, they certainly, when Joe had his first seizure, they did a spinal tap and everything to make sure that there was
Mm.
nothing underlying. But then we were just kind of told, we'll get him on phenobarbital or whatever it is. And it became pretty clear that that wasn't going to be the case, that phenobarbital wasn't working. And over time, his seizures got more frequent and more severe. At first, they were, some shaking. I remember talking to the neurologist and saying Joe's manifested himself like he was trying to start a motorbike. It was his hands kind of going like this a lot, and he would, shake as well. But for those first 6, 7 months, it was trying to not worry about it and waiting for him to outgrow it, like we were told might be the case. So I certainly we were worried and we were scared, but we had reason to believe that this wouldn't be a part of Joe's life going forward. I mean, we tried to take it that way. Plus, at that point, his brother and sister were, 7 years old and 5 years old. So my wife and I, we had our hands full all the way around, just in general.
Mm. Wow. And so navigating that period of uncertainty without having a diagnosis must have been difficult.
It was very difficult because for the folks that are listening that don't know, with epilepsy treatments and medication, it's not a matter of, oh, this isn't working, and you just stop it one day and start the other one the next day, right? You have to get up to the efficacy levels that it needs to be, and you have to wean off those types of things. And unfortunately, while that is going on, the seizures are still occurring,
Yes.
right? So you really feel hopeless and helpless. Your job as a parent is to protect this little one. That's the gift you've been given, and that's what you want to do. And something like this makes you feel, really helpless. And we
Yeah.
found out after the fact, Joe had been misdiagnosed, and I'm sure we'll talk about that some of the medications doctors had been trying were the exact opposite of what he should have been having. So unfortunately, some of those medications probably made his seizures worse than they needed to be. So a lot of uncertainty, and then you're trying to keep life as normal as you can for the other kids. So it's a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty and
Mm.
a lot of juggling.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the unspoken battles or challenges when families have to support their child with epilepsy. It's a completely unpredictable event. You can have a day where you're having seizures back to back, and you could have some days when you don't have as much seizures. But it's like you said, it's that uncertainty, that unpredictability where, anything can happen at any time and your child needs you all the time. It can be quite difficult.
Well, and especially when you're trying to create whatever the sense of normalcy is for your entire family, right?
Family.
For the other children as well. You want to be able to plan things. You want to not have every time you leave your house to have it be like a combat battle with the go bag and the diastat and all the things that you need to have. But that's the
Yeah.
reality of it. So it's not just the uncertainty in the moment, it's the uncertainty and the inability to do, what some people would call regular daily things. And so
Yes,
it's a lot of
absolutely.
that stuff, a lot of that stuff.
It is. It is. And I think as a clinician who has looked after children with epilepsy for almost 3 decades, I always have so much respect for the families because I know it's not easy at all. Any day could be an emergency day. You could be in the hospital completely unplanned.
I
I,
remember it. There was a day when we were about to head over to my parents for Thanksgiving, big holiday here in the States, and we were about to head over. Literally, Joe was in his coat waiting by the door, and he had a seizure, but it was a seizure that wouldn't stop, which is also part of it as well. Most of them resolve themselves. So
mm,
literally, it means an ambulance call and an ambulance ride. And instead of spending Thanksgiving at Grandma and Grandpa's, we spent the
yeah.
next 3 days in the PICU. and
Yeah.
his timing was always immaculate. He could always pick the absolute worst time to do it, which I think is that's how a child likes to get back at mom and dad, and I say that with a smile on my face. But yes, it no matter what you have planned, you
Mm,
always know in the back of your head, we've got to be ready for it all to go sideways.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Mm,
we do appreciate all that you did during that time. And we do know Joe ended up having a diagnosis of Dravet syndrome.
mhm.
This is rare, often
Yes.
sometimes misunderstood. So, do you want to just describe to families about what Dravet syndrome is? Because,
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to give you my best guess at the medical side of it. What I
yeah,
was told, and please correct me, but that the sodium channels in his brain, and that's well, first of all, people need to understand what epilepsy is, and I'm going to talk about it
yeah,
in layman's terms. Just about everybody these days uses computers. And we all know, although they're much more reliable than they used to be, back in the early days, you'd get that blue screen when something would
mm,
go wrong. And it was usually because the computer was trying to do two things at once, and the processor
mm,
just went, nope, nope, we're going to stop. That's how I describe epilepsy to people. The brain's trying to do two things at once, or it's trying to do something, it's a command it's not supposed to do, and the brain
mm,
doesn't know what to do, and it just shuts down. And the way that it shuts down, what I believe is it's telling the body something's wrong. Stop whatever you're doing. Your entity feels threatened, and so it shuts it down, and you drop to the ground, or whether it's an absence seizure or whatever it is. I believe that's what epilepsy in general is. And there's lots of. I also say to people, there's not just an epilepsy. There's the epilepsies, right? Because there's just as
yeah,
many causes as there are manifestations of it. Joe's happened to be that drop to the ground, shaking one, but there are absence seizures. And there's lots of different ways the body and the brain try to protect itself from this incursion that's going on with it. So that's epilepsy in general. And so it can be caused by head trauma or a tumor or lots of other things. Joe was caused by, at a chromosomal level, the sodium channels weren't delivering the information the right way, and it would cause him to, like I said, in most cases, just drop to the ground and shake. Most of the time, it would resolve itself in a minute or 2 minutes. But when it didn't, we would then try the rectal diastat, which was the next step. And when that didn't work, then you place the call to 911 and all the things that went on with that. So, Gervais was hammering this poor little guy's brain constantly. Those seizures were, every time that happens, it's not good. It's not what's supposed to be happening in the brain. So that in general is debilitating, those frequent and severe seizures. And then Gervais kids, at least 15 years ago, I know there's been some progress made, also tend to be nonverbal, and there's lots of other developmental delays that go with it. And those first couple years before we ever heard the word Gervais, we were just trying to figure out what was going on.
mm,
But it was I think the prognosis has gotten slightly better for kids with Gervais,
yeah,
but it's still not great.
yeah. I think you said it correctly. You've said it 100% correctly. You've got nothing
Yeah,
to add to this. You've described what is happening with the brain shutting down and just not communicating,
right.
and it can be very difficult. And now, because of all the advances in medicine, there's a lot of things happening in terms of understanding more about different forms of epilepsy. So Dravet is caused by a specific kind of genetic defect which affects the channels in the brain, the sodium channels that you've talked about. And a lot of children, and you've described this as well, will not just have just the epilepsy, but they have all the developmental difficulties. And I could see that Joy was nonverbal. But you said he communicated his joy through music,
He did.
singing, and dancing in his own unique way. Do you want to tell us more about
Abs-
that?
Absolutely. He, like many kids, 2 and 3 years old, was liked Elmo and the Teletubbies and all of those kids' programs. And music is a big part of those. And it was obvious when those moments would happen in those shows, the singing, Joe would light up and he would walk around. And if there were a bunch of people around, he would make sure that everybody stood up to dance when the music came on. And I would give anything to have a camera now to see 7, 8 adults all standing, bopping up and down to the Teletubbies song. But, Joe was very persuasive in his beautiful, cute face. You couldn't say no to him. And he would come around. And so while he couldn't speak, his word for dancing was D. So he would walk around to everybody and grab your finger and say, D, D, D. And they would have to get up and dance. And he wasn't happy until everybody was up dancing.
Wow.
So music was his connection to the outside world. And then when he was after a seizure and he was post-ictal, we would put on those Baby Einstein videos, which were all music because those were all soothing as well. So music was a huge part of his connection with the world and a huge part of how he interacted with his world.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. To find that language that he connected with people and found joy and connectedness, that is just amazing.
Yes, he for all the things that life threw at that little guy, he was always as happy as he could be and was always looking for fun. And, that as a parent is one of the big things you can ask for your child.
It's just great memories that goes with
Absolutely.
you. Yeah.
See, that's what I said earlier. I get a chance to talk about my son. This is a great job to
This
have.
is this is just well, it's amazing, just to have that memory of him finding joy in something that he used in connecting with other people.
Yes,
And those are precious, precious, precious
absolutely.
moments that
And that's why, to do our fundraising, we chose music. And that's why it's called Joey's Song, right? Because there's Elmo's song, Elmo's. So we chose Joey's Song as kind of a tribute to that. So it really has turned out a fitting way for us to do our work with something that Joe connected with.
That's great. So Mike, how did things then go till the point where Joey then passed away? Did the seizures just continue, and how was that moment going for you and the family?
Yep. So this was 15 years ago, and the treatments for Dravet there was really nothing. A drug called stiripentol had just made its name, but at that point it was being imported from Russia. It was just something that we had found right before Joe passed. So we really never had control of his seizures or really much relief from his seizures. So we were actually, preparing ourselves for a life of having 24/7 care. And his passing actually happened. We tried to give the other two kids as normal of a life as we could. And so every spring break, I would take them somewhere for vacation because they did need to go somewhere too. So I happened to be down at Disney in Florida with my two young kids when Joey had passed, and got that call from my dad, actually called from the hospital or the emergency room. And I'm not sure it really sunk in. To be honest with you, it woke me up in the middle of the night at a hotel room, and I'm not sure. I think I tend to be a pretty practical person anyway, so I think I was just asking questions, and I think I honestly, I haven't thought a whole lot about it, but I think my first response is he's not going to suffer anymore, right? Because I can't imagine the terror and the fear. I mean, I've never had a seizure. But so I think that was kind of my first reaction. And I woke the kids up. They were sleeping. And I think they understood. It's hard to know what kids at age, 9 and 7 really get. And obviously, all I could think about was my wife because she was back here with Joe and with him during his passing. And so we turned right around, and we were very fortunate to be at a place like Disney where they have the resources. They arranged a plane and a car and everything to get us to the airport. And by 6 o'clock that morning, we were heading back to Madison. So it was obviously very difficult. And like I said, his passing was kind of a mixture, and I'm sure the percentages of this changed from grief to a little bit of relief that he wouldn't, because as I said, the prognosis was not going to be good. It wasn't like, oh, in a couple more years, it'll be great.
Yeah.
So a whole potpourri of different thoughts and feelings and kind of weaving back and forth in
Mm,
between them all.
yeah. And how was the rest of the family? How were your other
Yeah.
children? Because sometimes it's very difficult when siblings have another sibling having seizures and having to go into hospital back and forth.
Yeah. They certainly knew something was wrong.
Mm,
I'm going to guess at the time they didn't quite understand how severe it was, because they would see him most of the time having his seizures, and as I said, them, rectifying themselves and everything.
mm,
And when they didn't, it was, the ambulance would come, and unfortunately, after a while, the ambulance people knew what to expect when they got here, right? So there wasn't a whole lot of that. Okay, what's going on? They knew Joe, and we kind of almost had a protocol down. So, they knew that things weren't the way that they should be. Certainly
mm,
with his passing, I mean, I know we had left for Florida 5 days ago, and when he came back, he wasn't here, and they understood what had happened.
mm,
Obviously, well, not obviously, but my wife took it hard, because she was his primary caregiver. Basically, the way that we had decided was the optimal way to do this was, I took care of the two older kids, most of
mm,
the time, and would make sure that they were at a baseball practice or karate class or got their
mm.
homework done. And my wife would take care of Joe. And I'm sure that there's some, psychological thing of a caregiver when you devote 24/7 to
Yeah,
something, any person that you care about, and all of a sudden that task is gone, let alone
a
it being your
huge sense
child.
of loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it had been a struggle for her. She's doing much better now, but
Mm,
it was tough, and understandably so. There's no manual for grief, and there's no manual for how we're supposed to
no,
handle all this.
no. It's been a very long journey with his seizures and all that to that
Correct.
point as well. So
Correct.
how did you then navigate that process, and when did you start all coming out of it and then
Yeah.
thinking we need to do something for Joy?
I don't know how to say this. I'm a pretty practical person. I tend to, I like to try to solve problems. And to me, this was just another problem to solve. And upon his passing, how do I get us as a family where we need to be? I can't say I did it very
Mm,
well. I did it. I
mm,
can't say it was always smoothly, but I did it.
mm,
So that's how I deal with things in general, whether it's, the furnace breaking down or, whatever the problems are, and I know we men are notorious for trying to solve problems and not always listening to the problems. There's a bunch of cliches around that. But that was the approach that I took, is to make
mm,
sure that my wife was as good as she could be and my kids were as well.
mm,
And I think that helped me because it gave me the ability to focus on others. And I don't say that to appear selfless or any of that. It's just, it was a good distraction to make sure that Julia and Sam were okay, and to make sure that my wife Nori was okay as best they could be, and move it forward. And then part of that became, I needed to make sure I did something to try to minimize what other people might be going through. So I think
mm.
and the timing, after several years, it was time for me to retire anyway. So I could jump into this part of my life, this
Mm.
fundraising, this helping thing. So it was fortuitous timing on that front that I'm not sure I could have continued working, because your perspective on life certainly changes with something like this, and what seemed
Yeah.
important before doesn't quite seem so important afterwards, and you
Mm.
kind of
So you were
refocus.
still doing your full-time work then?
Yeah, for a while I was. I 3 or 4 years after his passing, but then I
Okay.
was fortunate. The timing was right for me to not do that anymore.
To step
So,
back. Yeah.
yep, to step back, and then
Yeah.
and then we had started this foundation as a small little thing, and it just started to get some momentum, and it was a good thing to throw myself into. But I was fortunate that I had something like that I could jump into. It
Yeah.
was This has definitely unequivocally been a part of the healing process.
Healing for
Absolutely.
you.
Yes,
Yeah, I think just doing
absolutely.
something towards a good cause as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said it started small. So how did it start?
So, oh man, now we're going to shift a little bit here to the entertainment business real quick. So, originally, my idea was to put out music CDs, recorded music. I had some friends back in my college days. I worked in the music business. I did not go on to do that as a career, but I had some friends that were notable musicians. And my idea was, so this is back in 2010, back when people still bought CDs. Now everybody streams their music. And so I got these CDs together, and they were a lot of work, and they didn't sell very much because nobody was buying CDs. But my hope was raise $500, write a check to the Epilepsy Foundation, and feel like, Joey's loss, something good came out of it. Well, it started to get a better response. People weren't necessarily buying the CDs, but they liked what we were doing, and we started holding these events. And more people started coming to the shows, and more people of note. I mean, we've got people that are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and our Grammy winners that every year come to Madison, and they don't get paid a penny. So all these artists, if you go to our website, Go-Go's and Bangles and Goo Goo Dolls and Cheap Trick and all Tears for Fears, all these bands, none of them take a penny to come to play for our event. So that's kind of one of the things that told me we were on the right track, that we were starting to, that it was also resonating with the performers. And a lot of serendipity, to be really honest with you. I'd like to say it was some master plan, but it was just taking what the universe threw at me.
Yeah. Yeah, Joy's heart
Yep.
of love is what has carried that through.
And people feel that. I honestly
Yeah.
believe that.
Yeah. Well, that is just amazing. And just to see how you started and what it's grown up to be and all that. Yeah. So
It's
have you
very
met a lot
fulfilling.
of people? Have you met a lot of people with Dravet along the line?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. With Dravet and epilepsy in general, especially parents.
Mm.
I get lots of notes, and lots of people thanking me, which they shouldn't be doing. I should be thanking them for their hard work that they're putting in, because they're the people that are still fighting the fight.
Mm.
But I get a chance to, kind of do that. What would you do differently kind of stuff when people
Mm.
that are in the middle of it. And I've got responses to all of those things as well. But yes, lots of folks with Dravet, and I worked with what was Greenwich Bioscience, which is now Jazz, and they've got the cannabinoids, and they
Yeah.
got a lot of Dravet success stories, and so they're one of the folks that helped me with what I do. So they've connected me with some Dravet families as well. So I have met
That's amazing.
more people than I wish I would have, to be honest with you, because I wish so many people weren't dealing with this. But
I
we're
know.
working on it. We're working on it.
I know, but I think it's the hope. There's always something about the hope that you bring to other people going through that journey. And that's the power of connection. And again, as we were talking, I'm just thinking this is Joy again, who love people to get up and dance and make sure that everybody go up and dance. This is him continuing that legacy of you doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He's still manifesting, even if it's virtually pulling people's fingers and telling him to get up and D. That's what he's.
Yes. Yeah. That's,
That's
yeah.
exactly what he's doing.
That's amazing. And what do you think about music as being a connector
Of
that brings
course.
people together around, even for a course like this? What do you think?
Unequivocally the most powerful connective force in the universe, because it transcends language, it transcends social status, it transcends to me, it connects people on a person-to-person level, right?
Mm.
And most people connect to music on very personal ways. Your first dance, your first kiss, your wedding song, the song you listen to when you're sad. Music, it's cliche, but it is such a
Yeah.
soundtrack to our lives. And music can be so personal. It can be disposable too, but music can be so personal that it's a way for people. If it then creates that connective tissue around an issue, it's even better, right? Because then one of the things I found with fundraising, especially for medical issues, is it can be sad, right? You can, and you do want people to know the bad thing you're trying to get rid of. But if you can do it in a way where people feel joy in the moment that they're helping, I think there's something to that. What I say to people is, what we do is serious, how we do it is not. right? I mean, what we're doing is very serious, but our events, certainly we scatter information around because there's a lot of people that come to our events that know nothing about epilepsy. They come because they like those artists. It's a great chance for us to create some awareness, but it's not we don't hit people over the head with it. We let them know
Yeah,
that this is really bad, and that's why we're doing this. But it's a joyous event. It's full of celebration, and it's full of all of that. And that's what music can be, and that's what it should do. And it, like I said, it connects people from every social class and every ethnic class, and all the different permutations of our society can join together, and that's kind of what we try to do. So I think it's the greatest connector.
it is. It is. Like you said, it does. It transcends language, transcends so many things. You just need to hear the rhythm and you flow.
That's
And
right. Well, it's funny with the language. So my wife is Puerto Rican by birth, and my kids were Guatemalan. They all came from Guatemala. And my daughter is very much into Latin, loves Bad Bunny. I mean, beyond loves. I can't even tell you how much. And it gets played here. I don't understand a word. I don't speak any Spanish, but the whole house is going. And that's part of it, right? And
yeah,
that shows that even a 65-year-old guy like me, white guy in Wisconsin, can like Bad Bunny when I don't understand a word of it.
what he's
That
saying.
right there is the power of music. That's the
Yeah,
power
it
of music
is.
right there.
But Joy showed that even when he was
Absolutely.
non-verbal, even when he was non-verbal, he got people up to dance, and he went around, made sure everybody got in. And I think it's just a beautiful story that is just Joy's through legacy of
Absolutely.
loving music and wanting people to connect with him. That's
Yep.
just
Agree.
continuing, and
I,
he's
I
just
agree.
bringing that help around.
Yes.
So there are lots of people worldwide living with epilepsy, and there's so many people going through this process of uncertainty. Child maybe not having a diagnosis yet, or receiving a catastrophic diagnosis where they know, there's no treatment. This is definitely not something that's going to be cured, and they're just, when the shutters come down after you've been told this is the journey. What message do you want them to hear? What would you want them to hear?
So I have two different messages. One is for the caregivers of those people, and that is make sure you take care of yourself. The person with epilepsy is dependent upon you. So self-care is really important. That tends to be what caregivers sacrifice. They don't eat right, they don't sleep, they don't find the things to create a sense of normal in their life. And I think that's the most important thing, because you're of no good to that person that you're taking care of if you're not at the top of your game, because this is an insidious disease, and it's got so many unknowns and unpredictable to it that you, as the caregiver, and I'm basically speaking to parents here, but they don't have to be at the top of your game. So find the ways to make sure you can take care of yourself. To the person getting the diagnosis, and again, obviously if it's a child, they don't understand, but to those receiving a diagnosis, demand honesty and straightforwardness from your neurologist and your doctor. We were lucky, one of the first neurologists that helped us, he wasn't our regular one. He happened to be on the night shift one night when Joe was in the ICU. And he said, the brain right now is like the bottom of the ocean. We know so little about it. He goes, well, here's what we try to do as a neurologist. And it was much more literate than what I'm about to say, but he basically said, we throw what we can at it. We try to do our best to figure out what's working and what's behind it. But because there's so many causes, et cetera, et cetera, that was actually very comforting to me, because if you are struggling and it's not, you're on your fourth, I mean, Joe was on 8 or 9 meds over his life, you're on your fourth med and it's like, why isn't this working? What's wrong? Right. And to understand the true complexity of it and the true unknown nature of it, at least for me, and I mentioned earlier that I'm a practical guy, that was very helpful. right? So those are the two things I would want people to understand if they just got a bad diagnosis for themselves or for a loved one, is take care of yourself. Well, either way, if you've got the diagnosis, please take care of yourself, but take care of yourself if you're a caregiver, and demand honesty and clarity from your medical team.
Absolutely. And I think this message goes to clinicians as well. Just thinking about how we deliver these messages and what the family is looking at, looking for those answers from us.
Yes.
I think honesty, being honest, is what is a big one. And do you have, what would you say to what would you wish that the clinicians who were looking after during those early stages, is there a way that you would have, things would have made that journey better for you from the beginning? Is there, when you look back?
Yeah. Well, so I'll try to do this real quick. The reason he was misdiagnosed was because of his adoptive status. I guess part of the panel screening that newborns get here in the US, a marker or whatever, I don't know this for a fact. This is what I was told, for Dravet may have been caught earlier. And our first neurologist didn't, it must have assumed that he had this screening and didn't. And so I guess I would say, never, to the clinicians, never make any assumption. I mean, if there's 100 points on the checklist, even if you're sure that the first 23 don't apply, do the first 23 anyway, because it can make a difference in a family and in a life and in getting something treated earlier. But otherwise, we were pretty lucky. Like I said, we were blessed with a series of doctors. We live here in Madison, Wisconsin, and there's a huge university hospital here, and they have
Yeah,
a great epilepsy center. There's another one in Milwaukee. So there's a lot of resources around us. So everybody did their best. And Dravet is just a really tricky one. And again,
it is.
15 years ago, there weren't even the options that there are today. And right now, the options
Yeah,
today aren't super great. They're better, but they're not super great.
yeah.
So,
Thank you so much. And I think this is a message that, because sometimes we as clinicians can become very wrapped up in just, looking at trying to find out what is wrong, but not really thinking about the families, how that process and that journey is for them, and the uncertainties that they're hearing.
yes,
And
agreed.
I think it is always good to consider these families are going through a journey, and your other children as well.
Yep.
They're going through that journey with you as a family, because with Joy being in and out of hospital, them not knowing what is going on, and why it's also good to involve them in conversations. So, because it must have been quite anxiety filled for them, not knowing what's happening day to day.
Right. Yes, for the entire family. And as a clinician, you've seen this many times. We haven't. This is our first time, right? And again, explaining it in big animal pictures, right? And taking it down to layman's terms and really explaining that's probably, now that we've gone this far down, that's probably the one thing I would ask all the clinicians, is learn how to speak like a layman, right? Because the shorthand that any professional does to quicken the conversations between the two professionals is great. But when one of the people in that conversation isn't the professional and doesn't know what an EEG is and an MLK and an OBG and all those other things, but so that would be, if I could say one thing to clinicians, it's work on your speaking to the milkman speech as opposed to another clinician.
Thank you so much. That's really good, and it's something that we have to reflect as clinicians all the time, because our messages are they getting through? And
Right.
you know what we think we've just communicated to the families, is it getting through? Are they understanding? Do they really understand the process, understand the journey? So thank you so much for for
Yeah.
saying that.
Yep.
Joey's song has raised a lot of money for research, and I'm sure the Epilepsy Foundations are thankful for what you're doing, because it's not easy raising that
No,
money, and the commitment from the people who are coming to support it. It's just, we I hope that families are benefiting from that research. And
I say to people, whenever they finally announce, specifically for Dravet, but when they finally announce an effective treatment for cure, nobody will convince me that we didn't buy that last test tube that the really smart lady in the lab coat mixed together, where she was able to go eureka. No, in my heart, I will know that if it hadn't been for us, she wouldn't have had that test tube to pour it
yeah,
in. And that's
it
why
is quite a lot of, yeah.
that's why every penny counts and everything, because you never know who or where or
Yeah.
what will, will turn that
Unlock
switch.
unlock
Yep.
that switch. Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
absolutely. Your story is really one that's very encouraging for the journey, but you persisted. And I think one of the things that you showcased in the conversation is the way you work together as a family, so that you were going through this difficult period, but you also recognized the needs of your other children and made sure that you were also being there for them as much as you could. And I think the ability to, speak and say, you have to support the other two. Your wife was Joe's main caregiver.
Right.
Very tough, but at least as a family, you were able to support each other to make sure that you carry the whole family along. And it's
Well,
been a very,
yeah.
yeah,
I think the other thing too is my wife and I are still together, and marriages often are torn apart after the death of
absolutely.
a child, and we're still together 15 years later. And so I think I will take a little bit of the hurrah for that, because she and I
Well
obviously
done,
have had to
man.
work on it. Yep. So
Well done, man, because I know as a clinician, seeing families, I do see lots of family breakdowns. It's something I
yep.
commonly see. So, you have showcased a lot of positive strengths, which I know lots of families listening to this will learn from. It's your dedication, it's your resilience, it's your positive approach, even your practical way of looking at things and not throwing the towel and saying, "Oh, that's it," but looking at how something great like Joy's song has blossomed from this. Which, when you keep describing Joy being nonverbal but still being able to communicate, and it just shows to me that that legacy is living on,
I,
and that's the legacy that lives on. Yes,
it's
Joe is
funny
not with us anymore.
you mentioned the dancing part. I had not made that connection after all these years of doing it. If this is Joey virtually grabbing that audience's finger and telling them to
Yeah,
dance, that's
yeah,
a beautiful picture, and I had never made that connection until you said it earlier.
yeah. That's the picture I got through when you were
Yeah.
describing that
Yep.
you got everybody to dance.
Yep.
And no, it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. So thank you so much for your dedication. Thank you for sharing this story, because for me it's meant a lot listening to Joy's story. And you know, I almost feel like I knew Joy from just, picturing the who he was from how you've described him, but just seeing the beautiful thing that you have done and the
Thank you.
families that you have reached out to, many, many, many families who through Joy would benefit today. That it's been amazing. And again, we've talked about the power of music and the connections from music, and how it transcends any description, any
Yep.
race or
Yep.
color, or
Social class, or yep.
social
Yep.
class. It's just amazing. So thank you so much for all you do, and I hope that Joy's song continues to blossom and blossom. I think, like you said, you didn't know this was going to be this way, but it just shows it was for a good cause. And and that's why you're helping people. It was for a good cause. It was from a genuine heart. And Joy is helping people he's doing that through you. So thank you so
Yeah.
much. And
Thank
thank
you
you for
for,
this lovely story that you
yeah,
have
well, thank
shared
you for
with us.
letting me, like I said, when we all started this, it gives me a chance to talk about my son. There's nothing better than that. So
Yeah. Well, it's been an amazing time to hear about Joy. So thank you so much for sharing.
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. As we always say, early intervention leads to better outcome. And early intervention can only be achieved by early diagnosis. So thank you for listening into the series today. I know some of the things we've talked about today would probably have generated some questions or need to seek clarification. So I'm happy to take questions, and I'll invite you to send your questions to eim@drtakon.com. Thank you for listening in.